like gnashing his teeth like a dog at me and growling at me. And the previous year I'd been paid £400,000 and he seemed genuinely worried about whether
400.000 chuches, el primer año. Ganan mucha pasta cada día y mejor los jefes pasaban de ti. Mientras traigas dinero, les daba igual cómo lo hicieras.
I lost $8 million in a week. So it was the right bet.
Qué cabrones, para que no se fuera le querían chantajear. Ya os dije en el vídeo anterior que iba a analizar uno de los vídeos de Gary Stevenson. Uno de estos dos. No tengo muy claro cuál. Este ya lo vi hace tiempo, pero me pareció buenísima la entrevista. Este es un poquito más corto, que creo que puede ser mejor, ¿no? Para lo que es el vídeo. A ver de qué trata cada uno. Creciendo en East London, expulsado del colegio, el juego del trading, su primer día. Estos locos son millonarios, estos maníacos, que serán sus compañeros de trabajo. El bonus que ganó le explotó la cabeza. Perdió 8 millones una semana. Una apuesta a 35 millones. ¿Qué cojones hago aquí? Dejando un trabajo de 2 millones de pavos. Y la desigualdad económica que, como visteis en el vídeo anterior, le da bastante importancia. Ya que tenemos el estilo de vida de dentro. El tema de los brokers, los jefes, los bonos, como es el reclutamiento, el money floor, que no sé a qué se referirá aquí, el trabajo y dejarlo. No sé si este puede estar más guay, ¿no? Que se centre más en el trading, en lo que nos interesa, su experiencia dentro del banco y el otro. Yo creo que voy a ver este y alguna parte igual del otro, si está guay, la meto. Vamos para allá, que solo son las 2 de la mañana, Álvaro. No miento, lo tenéis ahí abajo. Soy un alma nocturna. Vamos a ponernos, ¿dónde? Arriba, tapando Business Insider.
In 2011, I was Citibank's most profitable trader in the world. This is everything I'm authorized to tell you about being a trader of one of the world's biggest banks. You become the best trader in the world for one of the biggest banks in the world.
A ver, el estilo de vida. Venga, cuéntanos. 80.000 pavos en cocaína.
When I started working, it was this kind of a bit of.
El tío se ha metido por la nariz todo,
On my first week, they made me buy like 100 burgers and carry them up and like give them around the trading floor, this kind of thing. There was a lot of people getting taken out to expensive restaurants and clubs and taken out to holidays. I got taken to Vegas when I was 21. Before I went to Jay-Z's after party in LA. And then I went to Carmen Electra's birthday party. I hadn't even started working full time. And one of the nights, I can't even remember. It must have been like.
De fiesta con Jay-Z, Con 21 añitos y ni siquiera estaba como de interno todavía.
Like $20,000 or $30,000 one night in a Vegas club. To me, it was really weird because, you know, I come from a very poor background. And like, I was in a VIP table in LA with a bunch of like 35-year-olds. Who were paying girls who looked just like the girls I used to hang out with at uni to hang out with them, you know what I mean? My specific desk started to make enormous amounts of money, which was like.
Ya sabéis, TRADERS profesionales de bancos de inversión, Las Vegas, un grupo de chavales dejándose 20.000, 30.000 pavos por noche con chicas, eso sí, que no se las presentarías a tu madre.
Oh, some of the guys I was working with, like pretty crazy guys, and they started getting like really big for their boots, and one of the guys immediately got one of the secretaries pregnant, like within like a week. What it meant was the amount of money we were getting paid just for sitting.
Imagínate que llegas ahí y a la semana te aprietas a la secretaria y venga, bombo y despedido.
In and our seats went up a lot, which meant that you could afford to lose a lot of money without it appearing like you were losing a lot of money. So, for example, if you're making 100 grand a day for the bank, just for sitting in your seat, you can afford to lose 100 grand a day on bad bets and not actually be officially losing money. Obviously, I know now that there's like this massive stereotype that traders take cocaine. So I was expelled from school for selling £3 worth of cannabis when I was just turned 16.
Le pillaron por vender 3 libras de cannabis en el cole y claro, se mete a un trading floor de un banco de estos que la cocaína se pasaba como los lápices. Si necesitas uno, yo tengo, ¿no?
So I've never taken cocaine in my life. And, you know,
Gary.
Everyone's like going out partying until like 2 a.m., 3 a.m. and getting to work at 5 in the morning. And I was like, how the do these guys do it? You know, they're older than me as well. But by my late 20s, some of my mates were taking cocaine. Of course, that is what my whole career had been like. And then I realised, like, me, were those guys just on cocaine the whole time? And then since then, one of my colleagues who is very upset about the book came out and said, like, I think he said he was spending £80,000 a year on cocaine. Yeah, which is. But the funniest thing is, like, I had no idea it was happening. I had no idea it was happening. I thought he was an alcoholic. Probably the maddest thing was, again, this guy Rupert, from a very rich background, but he really took to me really quickly. And, you know, sometimes I feel bad about the way I portray him because he really was good to me. He really, like, sponsored my career, drove me through, and he would take me out, like, with all of.
Aquí uno de los traders veteranos le le acogió, ¿no? Y aparece en el libro este de Trading Game que va a sacar, un poco creo que también por lo que le entrevistan, cuenta todas las historias con seudónimos y se siente hasta un poco mal, ¿no? Por cómo lo pinta, a pesar de que el chaval, el otro, se portó muy bien con él. 80.000 pavos en cocaína al año, madre mía. Y tú que te tomas 3 chupitos y ya crees que lo estás dando todo.
He'd normally let me go like around midnight because otherwise I'd miss the last train and he'd have to pay for a taxi. But he was like, no, stay. He kept me out later and later. In the end, ended up staying around his place. I woke up, I felt like I went into the office, I just threw up. I had to go to the bathroom, just threw up. And the boss sent me home. Next day I came in early and the boss was like, oh, did Rupert do that to you? And I just laughed, you know. Then when Rupert came in, the boss goes to him, Gary said, you did that to him. And I knew that he'd be furious, right? And at the time, he used to sit 2 seats to the left of me, but there was an empty seat between us. And I just thought, don't look at him, just don't look at him. But I could kind of feel it like burning into my cheek. And then I start to hear like, at first, just kind of like a gentle growling, like a growling in the back, like a, like this. And then I just think, just don't look at him, don't look at him. And it starts to get like louder, like this growling.
Estaba como una cabra el otro colega, ¿eh?
It gets like louder and louder. He's on the trading floor in front of everyone. I'm just thinking, then I hear like this bang, this big bang, right? And then I think like,
Me estoy imaginando que el trading floor era como en la serie de Industry, que os la recomiendo. Algo así.
50 million, the last trade price was 45. I can sell you all 50 million at that price. All right, tell them
Y el otro raya aquí gruñéndote en el oído.
And he was turned around in his chair, like leaning over towards me, like that, like gnashing his teeth like a dog at me and growling at me. And I just looked at him and he did it for about, it must have been at least 10 seconds, just like growling, gnashing his teeth at me in front of everyone. And then I just looked back and then he just started the growling, started to just chill, and then he just kept on with his work and he never mentioned it again. That was it.
Soy de la risa del entrevistador. Brokers. Ellos no son brokers, ellos son traders. A ver, que hacer trading es muy difícil, lo sabemos todos. De hecho, yo, al igual que Gary, somos los primeros en lanzar un mensaje de prudencia. Pero que hay que invertir también lo sabemos todos, al menos en el medio y largo plazo. Y para eso tenéis, por ejemplo, un broker como es XTB, que muchos me preguntáis, Capelo, ¿qué broker me recomiendas? Sobre todo en Instagram. Pues una muy buena opción es XTB. Os voy a dejar un enlace en la descripción. Esto es para todos los que estáis en Latinoamérica. Sobre todo, aunque esta sea la web que veis en España, la vuestra quizás sea ligeramente diferente. Podéis ver, por ejemplo, las ventajas que recibís, como por ejemplo una remuneración por vuestro dinero. Y tenéis miles de acciones y ETFs, además de derivados como forex, divisas, materias primas. Forex y divisas es lo mismo, pero bueno, ya es un poco tarde y estoy espeso. Estos son pocos brokers con los que colaboro porque trabajé con ellos. Yo trabajé allí 3 años, conozco la gente que hay dentro, conozco cómo está regulado internamente. Es un broker muy seguro. Allá en cada país que está, sobre todo en Europa, está regulado. Y esto es algo que viene muy bien porque se traslada de una forma o de otra a Latinoamérica, aunque allí la regulación pueda ser diferente. Tiene además planes de inversión en el que podéis crearos vuestros propios planes a través de ETFs, por ejemplo. Y tenéis comisiones gratuitas hasta mover al menos 100.000 euros al mes, 100.000 euros, 100.000 dólares. Puede salir prácticamente gratis por ese lado. Muchos métodos diferentes de depósitos, de retiradas. Un broker bastante equilibrado en todos los sentidos. Buen servicio al cliente, una buena plataforma, muchos activos, buenos costes y con la comisión pues mejor aún. Las cuentas son gratuitas, obviamente, abrís una cuenta con ellos. Dale un vistazo, enlace en la descripción, ya me contaréis qué tal. Y vamos a ver que nos cuente Gary más historias porque el tío tiene para aburrir.
There's these brokers who kind of match the traders together, and their job is to help you get deals done. You know, you say I want to buy here, and they're supposed to find a seller. But in reality, what they were doing a lot of is basically taking people out, taking people to, and they had this kind of really interesting skill of them.
Interesante.
But the truth is, when I got taken out by these guys, even when I went to Vegas, we were going to like celeb parties in LA and Vegas. For me, it was work. It was just work. And I was just trying to sort of be the Gary that these guys wanted me to be. And it was quite fun. I didn't really realise. Because most people that go in there now come from rich backgrounds. Their dad was rich, their mum was rich, their friends are rich. All their mates have similar jobs. All their mates go to these VIP clubs, you know, they're booking tables and they're going to fancy restaurants. And plus there's this weird thing that happens where like brokers will take you to like, I remember they took me to watch England, my first England game. And then the next day, they're like, oh, can you do this deal for me? And then you realise, like, oh, there's a kind of like hidden little quid pro quo here, which I wasn't really comfortable with. So eventually, like, I started to just like say, look, I don't meet no brokers. I don't go for no dinners. I instituted Nando's only rule. So for Americans who don't know what Nando's is a popular grilled chicken chain.
Vamos, que los brokers les invitaban a todo para después, oye, necesito un favor, oye, ¿puedes aceptarme este trato o cómprame esto? Que, por supuesto es de otro cliente suyo, de otro trader, y pues eso, les van colocando la mierda, ¿no? Me imagino. Por supuesto, esto es a un nivel que nosotros no entendemos. Ver la serie de Industry, que creo que se representa bastante bien una parte de esto. Estoy viendo porque quiero ver cómo le contrataron.
And that was it, accepted me to the school. I got 4 A's and I got into LSE, which is, for those who don't know, London School of Economics. It's a super fancy, prestigious economics university in central London where a lot of international, like, millionaires and billionaires send their kids to study. And I started there when I was 18, doing maths and economics. Suddenly at LSE,
Y también gente normal, como él. Es menos, pero también hay gente que entra.
everybody knew who I was. I said to him, why does everybody know who I am? And he was like, well, it's because of your grades. And this guy, Sagamade, was #1 in the maths department in first year. So I was like, well, your grades are better than mine. And he said, well, yeah, of course, but nobody expected it from you. Suddenly at LSE, you realise these posh boys think we're dumb. They actually think that we're stupid. And then I think that sort of lit a little bit of a fire, which made me sort of think, well, you know, let's show them that we're not stupid. Yeah, I think that motivated me as well. People had become obsessed with investment banking internships, right? They started wearing suits. People would come into university in suits, like, for no reason. And they were applying for like
Esto lo he visto yo en Madrid, era patético.
35 internships at a time. My mate was like, well, this is internship year. You're like, okay, what's internship year? And the way you get a job is you get an internship now. You can't get a job unless you get an internship now. You know, and I'm hoping I'm going to compete on the back of my grades, but you don't have your grades yet. So you're like, okay, well, how do we get an internship? And what it is you've got to send CV and cover letter. You've got to send 35 CVs and 35 cover letters, right? And, you know, my grades at undergrad were good, but everyone at LSE's undergrad grade, like, A-levels are good. Everyone at Oxford, Cambridge, all their A-levels are good, right? So how do you stand out at that level? It's basically extracurriculars on your CV. Their families knew this, and they'd been making sure they had this extracurricular stuff. So, like, this guy would have been head of the Junior United Nations, or this guy would have, like, founded a charity that, like, these jobs are going to be distributed based on how good we are at clarinet. You realise, like, there's no...
Pero eso también es porque son bancos de inversión y sus clientes son los padres, la familia. Pero lo consiguió, ¿eh?
And what did you do next? What was your plan?
I was in the library one day, and this lanky northern guy with kind of, like, Beatles haircut, he wandered up to me. I'd never met him before, and he said, are you Gary Stevenson? And I was like, yeah. And he said, I'd never met this guy in my life. He said to me, Citibank hires one trader a year through a card game. It's called the trading game. And if you win it, you can get an internship.
What is the trading game?
It's a betting game, basically. It's kind of a poker-style game. Basically, they had their own special made deck of cards. So there's some low cards and some higher cards. We hand all the cards out. So 5 of us are playing. We all get a card. And there's 3 cards on the middle which get turned over as we play the game. And basically, we bet with one another what the total of the cards are going to be. I knew straight away what the LSE students would do. So if you've studied maths or economics or statistics or something like this, straight away, you're going to do this, like, mathematical calculation in your head, which is to calculate the expected value of the total cards given the card that you have in your hand. This is not complicated maths. Anyone who's studied maths will be able to do this. They'll instinctively do that, and then they'll start betting around what they think the total is going to be, which is a very stupid way to play the game, although it's obvious, because if, you know, you've got a high card and this guy over here has a low card, and you both start quoting based on what your card is, you'll be betting the total's going to be, say, 70. He'll be betting the total's going to be like 50. And I can just buy at 50, sell at 70, buy at 50, sell at 70, again and again and again and again and again. So there were 2 rounds, basically. There was an LSE round, which I won very easily. And then there was a final where they had students from, like, elite universities across the country, Citibank's target universities, whatever, Oxford and Cambridge and this kind of thing. And at the final, everyone had already played the game, so they kind of knew the strategy. And between the first round and the final, I just didn't go to class. I spent 3 weeks, like, obsessively memorising this game. So by the time I got to the final, I was, like, probably the world's, like, preeminent expert on this game. I had another strategy, which again, perhaps typically of myself, was to be very loud and a bit obnoxious in the game and try and like bully the market, basically, bully the price to go where I want it to be. And I had an extremely low card in the final. And my plan was to like bully the price up really high and start selling at this high price because I know it can't be that high because I've got this low card. And the cards in the middle turn over and they were quite high. So I just pushed the price up and I was just trading really, really aggressively. The game finishes and everybody turned their cards over. There's 8 cards in the game, right? 5 players, 3 in the middle. I had the lowest card possible. The other 7 cards were the 7 highest possible cards, which is basically statistically impossible. It's like 1 in like 10 million chance or something like this. Like it's impossible happening. And you realise straight away, the game's been rigged against me. And of course I lost enormously because this thing that happened is basically statistically impossible. And I was sort of sitting there in this like, it was in this like high floor in this Citibank skyscraper, just asking myself like, why have they rigged the game against me? And then the guy who ran the games comes to the front and he says, the winner of the game was Gary Stevenson. And he said we wanted to see what he would do if everything turned out against him. We wanted to see someone who would back himself, and he did. So Gary's the winner. So yeah, they rigged the game against me, which I think is a little bit of a metaphor for the world that we live in, I think.
And then you
Hostia, súper interesante. Le contrataron a través de un juego de trading game que no acabo de entender muy bien cómo hacían luego. Imagino que sería una ronda de compras y ventas, ¿no? Oye, yo tengo esto, te lo compro la tuya por tanto. Y al final se sumarían quizás los puntos, no me ha quedado muy claro. Pero bastante curioso. Y entonces entró en el trading floor. ¡Buah!
But then I was like the biggest trader in like one of the biggest traders in the world. So like so many people wanted to go to Nando's for me. I was eating Nando's every day. So I just sort of like cut it off and I became very antisocial actually. I think, you know, the brokers, the traders maybe are not socially aware to realise it, but the brokers, because their job is kind of party people. And also, a lot of the brokers come from poorer backgrounds and come from my neck of the woods. They realise very quickly, Gary is just here pretending to have a good time so that other traders have a good time, because that's exactly what they're doing. And they realise, like, listen, Gary just doesn't really this is not his game, really. And they sort of let me get away from that.
Oye, muy guay. Se convirtió tan bueno que al final ya me dejaron en paz porque dijeron, con este no rascamos nada. Los jefes.
These guys are mainly people who couldn't cut it as traders, so they tried to like climb the greasy pole. And what they make their money on is basically internal politics. The kind of person who decides to make their money managing internal politics in an investment bank is usually a bit of a The management is just like, you wouldn't hire him, would you? So I became the Swiss franc trader when I was 22, which is really, really young. And the way it happened was, my boss, who was a Swiss franc trader, quit. And a new boss got put in. And he was a really nice guy, but he seemed a little bit kind of like dopey in a way. And he stood up and he said to me, what's your job on the desk then? And I'm thinking like, and I told him, I'm the Swiss franc trader, which was my old boss's job. And he was just like, oh, right, okay. All right, fine. I love my second boss, but he was totally insane. I remember once he sat me down just like, Gary, I
Tío, todos los colegas suyos estaban locos,
really need to apologise. And I was like, what for? And he was like, we can't give you a salary increase. And I'd never even asked for one. And the previous year I'd been paid £400,000. And he seemed genuinely worried about whether
400.000 chuches, el primer año. Sí, que es Londres, ya es,
I could survive on it. You know, and then I just said to him, yeah, it's really tough. What else can you say to these guys? The only thing I ever saw get escalated to HR was a guy who stole money from another trader. And even that, there was a general consensus on the desk that he shouldn't have escalated to HR, that we should have dealt with it between us. It's a very masculine way of like, you know, we sort it out between us, we don't go to HR. Because the truth is, a lot of people do dodgy shit. A lot of people get away with it because if you're making money on it, management, maybe it's changed, but management are not going to ask. I was making a ton of money, tons of money. Nobody ever asked how I was making it. Management never asked how I was making it because they're going to get paid on it rather than to find out. When you lose money, a lot of stress gets placed on you. The worst thing...
Joder, qué de cosas tú. Estoy aquí súper concentrado viéndolo. Ganan mucha pasta cada día y mejor los jefes pasaban de ti. Mientras traigas dinero, les daba igual cómo lo hicieras.
Which was in my second full year as a trader in 2010. I'd put a big bet on, which had some risk to Swiss interest rates. And the Swiss central bank suddenly cut rates to -4.
Me acuerdo de esto, me acuerdo. Fue en el 15, ¿no? ¿Cuándo he dicho?
1.5%, for some crazy reason.
Sí, tenía un cap y se pegó un guantazo.
Specifically using the product that I was betting on. I lost $8 million in a week. The maddest thing about it was the right bet. If I was allowed to keep that position, I would have made it all back. But I wasn't allowed to keep that position. So you end up $4 million in the red and you have to fight your way out of it.
8 millones de pavos apostando a favor del franco suizo. Claro, cayó un 4,5% en un día, creo que fue. Más a los bonus.
I'm pretty sure my salary was 36k when I first started, which was a good salary for the time. I mean, it's not even a bad salary even now. P&L is profit and loss, and it's the only thing that matters in the world if you're a trader, basically. So every day you get a spreadsheet that tells you every single trader's P&L, which obviously means like if you're the best trader, you're the best trader. But if you're losing money, everybody can see. It's very clear who the best is and it's very clear who the worst is. And that starts to become how you interact with other people and it starts to become how you see other people. There's this kind of beautiful fairness to it, in a weird way. And I think there's not a lot of places in the world, other than sort of the football pitch, where a kid like me, from nowhere, can come in and compete with all of these multimillionaires from rich families and be like the guy at 24. Traders in my department were getting paid about 7% of their P&L, but I didn't know that at first. And
un 7% de sus ganancias se quedaban. Imagínate, estarían ganando millones al año.
There's this kind of idea like you can't ask anyone what their bonus is, so it was like really mysterious. And then this thing happened after my first bonus at the beginning of 2010 when I got paid nearly £400,000, which would be like, at the time, maybe $700,000. So much more than I'd been expecting. And it kind of broke me a little bit. And I just became like, oh my God, there's so much money to be made here. This is it. All we're doing now is trading. And then obviously the next year I lost this $8 million in a week really quickly. And that just, again, beat me. Like, you have to be better. You have to be more serious. You have to work harder. And I just became like, this machine. Most of the traders, in my opinion.
Estás tú que te pagan 400.000 pavos y no te obsesionas aún más con el trabajo. Y esto es la motivación del mundo. Si encima te gusta, creo que finalmente no acabó siendo el caso del chico. Pero bueno, y tenía la competencia interna que ya he comentado, que tenía una pizarra, una tabla donde salía el mejor, bueno, los resultados de cada uno. Entonces están constantemente compitiendo. A él le gustaba. Decía que era una especie de justicia en el aire. Él, que venía de un barrio pobre, podía ser el chavalito de 24 años que es el crack.
We're not making huge amounts of money from taking risky positions, speculative positions. They're making most of their money from the customers. But they're kind of trying to pretend they're making it from their bets. But most traders want to be making money from betting because that's sort of the...
Es curioso, claro. A ver, yo imagino que en el banco tradeaban para otros clientes y también sus propias posiciones, que como dice aquí, no ganaban tanto de posiciones propias porque es muy difícil, pero sí de los trades de los clientes, porque, oye, cómprame esto a este precio. Igual luego hablaba con el broker y otro trader del otro lado y consiguió un mejor precio y él se llevaba la diferencia también. Harían sus chanchullos.
The glamorous side of it, you know, like, you know, can you actually beat the market? It wasn't really till 2011 that I started to make some big bets. You know, like I always remember in 2011, the Japanese nuclear disaster. I made a ton of money on the Japanese nuclear disaster, but because I was betting on economic weakness, this crazy thing happens that there's no way you could have predicted. You make a ton of money. People sometimes turn around to me and they say, oh, it's terrible that you made money betting on these things happening. And, you know, I made money from the Japanese earthquake, right? 20,000 people died in that earthquake, in the following tsunami. I didn't make that tsunami happen. I think that's important to realise. And these guys' job is to bet on it and to be right on it. And they're very, very heavily incentivized to be right. The payment structure is very weird, or at least it was back then. You would get paid a lot of money in a bonus, but it would be like deferred. So you get this money in 4 years. Since I left banking...
O sea, lo que vas ganando te lo van dando poco a poco a lo largo de 4 años. Claro, esto es para retenerte. Pero imagínate que eres muy bueno, seguramente te vengan otros bancos de inversiones y vente con nosotros. De esta forma te retienen, yo creo, ¿no? Si yo tuviera que hacer esa política sería por eso.
This rule
Eso y ahorrarme también dinero, no pagártelo hasta más adelante.
came in this EU law that limited bonuses as a multiple of salary, which meant that the way payment happened is completely changed. Now, because of that bonus cap, what they will have to do instead is they massively increase your salary. And since then, salaries have increased massively and bonuses have decreased massively, which decreases the incentivization to take risk. And it also increases the incentivization to kind of sit on your chair and sit around and like take the money.
Interesante. Una nueva ley que capó los bonus hasta un múltiplo concreto X del salario. Pues lo que tuvieron que hacer es subir el salario un montón y reducir los bonus. Hacerlo al revés. Entonces la gente ya no tenía tanto incentivo en ser un crack para ganar en sus apuestas. Claro, al año que viene lo que hacen es reducirte el salario un montón, ¿no? Y vuelta a empezar. Pero sí, esto puede ocurrir. El reclutamiento ya lo hemos visto un poco, lo que nos ha contado antes.
First thing says there's lots of different kinds of traders trading lots of different kinds of things. I was an interest rates trader.
Oh, tipos de interés. Esto los trae yo también en Madrid. Súper difícil. Sterling, Euribor, el eurodólar, pero no el eurodólar como la divisa, el eurodólar del tipo de interés. Tipos de interés de corto plazo, además. Hacemos express de futuros.
It means I was borrowing and lending money. Interest rates traders borrow and lend money. And the idea is quite simple. You want to borrow at a low interest rate and you want to lend at a high interest rate. So a lot of what is done on that desk, the STIRT desk, the short-term interest rates trading desk, is one-day loans.
Los STIRs. ¡Ja! ¡Qué mítico! Tiempos aquellos.
Corporations, pension funds, hedge funds that have loans running out will come to people like me and say, we've got a loan in 6 months. What interest rate will you give us for a loan starting in 6 months' time? On a very, very basic level, when the economy is good, sometimes just because inflation is overheating, the central banks raise rates. And they cut rates when the economy is weak. So in a very broad sense, although we are also looking at inflation, really we're trying to judge the strength of economies. In my desk, there were about 10 traders, and each trader's job was to look at a different currency, and you kind of get promoted through the ranks. It's split between what you'd call rich world currencies and what they call emerging market, poorer country currencies. So on my desk, the rich world desk, we're basically doing Europe, Japan, North America, Australia, New Zealand. First I was, desk junior, buying the coffees. Then I was New Zealand dollar trader. Then I was Swiss franc trader. Then eventually I was Euro trader. Then I moved to Japan and I was yen trader. As interest rates traders, we make loans. We borrow and lend money. We try to borrow cheap and lend high.
Esto luego es el carry trade, lo que ha pasado un poco con Japón. Modificado los tipos de interés.
A lot of people do that. So in 2011, by the time I became a really profitable trader, Citibank, for some reason, had this big thing where they wanted to become the biggest bank in the world in terms of volumes traded. And because we're doing one-day loans, it's massive volume, because if you borrow money for a day, you have to come back every day. It's stupid, but it looks like really big volume. And it meant that senior management had asked me to try to do as much trades as I could. So I was probably lending and borrowing between currencies, probably not far off $1 trillion a day of a variety of currencies, which was ridiculous.
1 trillón al día, ha traducido ahí como 1 billón, y creo que el Forex es como 4 trillones al día. Lo que al menos hace unos años, ¿no? La típica frase que se dice, ¿no? Es el mercado más grande del mundo, hasta 4 trillones al día. Esto es porque es apalancado, es un mercado apalancado. Es decir, las garantías que te piden son muy pequeñas en comparación con lo que mueves. Y este tío está moviendo uno de ellos. Este o su departamento, vaya, me imagino. ¿Por qué dejó todo esto? Porque, ya te digo, esta entrevista a mí me encantó. Y también la otra, que os lo recomiendo, os la dejaré en la descripción para que vayáis a verlo. Pero además es un tío que lo cuenta ameno, piensa muy bien. Vas a ver aquí su faceta antisistema.
I was in a situation towards the end of my career where I was trying to get fired. I was a very successful trader, but for a very short time, and I quit when I was like 27, I think. I was just so in the game, and I was quite dehumanized in a way. I'd done it to myself, But I mean, how do I balance this love for being the best with also like being a human and taking care of myself and also fulfilling my responsibility to a collapsing society? The traders don't think it's their job because they're trying to do trades to make money. The politicians are trying to win elections. The academics are trying to write fancy papers. The guys in media are trying to get clicks and get views, and, Actually, nobody's trying to fix it. My big success was in 2011, and that came from this...
Es un buen análisis rápido, ¿eh? No le falta razón, en parte.
Realization that the economy was never going to get better. That we had a growing crisis of inequality that wouldn't be resolved, that the rich would get richer and the ordinary people would get poorer, living standards would collapse, things would collapse. And I put that bet on. And I never really stopped to think, what does that mean? Because my job was to bet on these things. If your job is to look at the economy, think, is it going to be strong and is it going to be weak? That's what you do, you know what I mean? And by the end of that year, 2011, I've become Citibank's most profitable trader in the whole world by this bet that society would collapse. And everybody could see that I'd done that. Nobody turned around and said, should we do something? There's not like a bell you can go and ring. You know, I think it's worth realising, right? The best paid 10,000 economists in the world are all traders. Towards the end of my career, I decide I want to leave, and I tell my boss I want to leave. And my boss takes me out for this dinner, and he told me a story about a trader, a young trader at Deutsche Bank who, you know, nice guy, good trader, wanted to leave. The only problem is Deutsche didn't really want him to leave, you know, so they went through looked through some of his past trades and his emails, you know.
Hostia, ¿le querían chantajear?
There wasn't really anything in there, but there was enough, you know. There was, you know what I mean, enough to take him to court, and
Qué cabrones, para que no se fuera le querían chantajear.
he rolled through court for years and years, and eventually the guy was bankrupted. And then he literally said to me, you know, I like you, I think you're a good person, but sometimes bad things happen to good people. We can make life very difficult for you. You're going to
Qué cabrones.
find out about that. It's so obviously similar to the way that like gangsters speak. That's
A ver, me imagino que sea verdad, pero es un poco extraño. O sea, ¿por qué vas a querer tener a un trader desmotivado trabajando cuando este trabajo depende mucho de la capacidad, de la actitud y de las ganas que le pongas, ¿no? También. Porque este tío ya te lo dice, estaba luchando por ser el mejor constantemente. Si le tienes amenazado, seguramente su desempeño caiga. No sé. Bueno, no quiero decir nada. Me imagino que fuera así. Curioso. Bueno, me parece buena estrategia como jefe. Quizás con dinero, ¿no? Más dinero. Porque sí, este dice que el dinero tal, pero bueno, bonus, unos cuantos años más sí que lo retienes.
exactly the same kind of person that goes into drug dealing. Exactly the same kind of person. And I can't help but think that a lot of the guys who become traders, if they grew up on the street I grew up on, would have been drug dealers. And a lot of the kids selling drugs in Ilford, if they went to the same boarding school as Rupert, and if they went to LSE, they would have become traders. Really, because it's the exact same personality type. I come from a very poor background, and the people who are being hurt by what is happening in the economy are people that are exactly like me when I was a kid, and people that are exactly like my mum and like my dad and like my sister and like my friends I grew up with. But it was really a long time before I ever started to explicitly think, should we do anything about this? And by then I've been kind of like kicked out to Tokyo, and my junior was this very, very, very posh, very rich, very wealthy, but very smart Australian kid. And I said to him, you know, do you think we should do something? And he was like, about what? And I was like, you know, about like collapsing global economy. And he was like, yeah, we put that trade on. We bought the green euro dollars. And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, yes. But, you know, do you think we should do something? And he was like, I don't understand what you mean. You don't go into trading to save the world. But you kind of assume that there are people whose job it is to look after the world. You know, like politicians, most obviously.
Quedó desencantado con el mundo, no le gustó muchas cosas que vio y dijo, tiene que haber algo mejor. No le llenaba, pero lo puedo entender. Pero son trabajos que si no haces tú lo hará también otra persona y que no necesariamente es algo malo. Quiero decir, que tú estés tradeando ciertos activos financieros que creas que pueden tener movimientos fundamentados en algo que ocurre en la realidad, como bien ha dicho él antes, no quiere decir que lo estés haciendo tú, ni que lo hayas causado tú. Y probablemente si tú ganas dinero igual lo está perdiendo un banco de cualquier otro sitio, un trader del Deutsche Bank, como te dice él. O sea, que no es todo, es verdad que el dinero al final la gente sabe moverlo mejor que los mortales medios, no necesariamente, como ha puesto el ejemplo de Japón antes, le estás quitando dinero al que ha perdido la casa justo al lado de Fukushima. No lo sé. Es todo un poco dramático y de hecho la existencia de mercados financieros genera beneficios bestiales para las economías. ¿Ha habido excesos? Por supuesto. Mucha parte del trading que hay desde la crisis del 2008 ya no es manual. Este chico sería de lo poco que quedaba por aquel entonces y ahora está todo bastante más automatizado, muy controlado. Ya habéis visto lo de los bonos, controladísimo. Pero sí, está bastante desencantado con el sistema y bueno, quiere hacer algo para arreglarlo, me parece bien.
Economists at universities, economists at central banks like the Fed, like the Bank of England, economists in the media. You kind of think these guys, their job is to look after it. But what was becoming increasingly clear to me was, well, our job is not to fix it. Those guys whose job is to fix it, they're definitely not going to fix it.
No.
Like, I want to leave and work for charity, and the banks are just, you know, the senior management is just very strongly implying, well, we're going to sue you. And at that point, they have no reason to sue you. They're just going like, well, you do that, we're going to sue you. And I think, to be honest, that high levels of banking, and probably high levels of a lot of other industries, that's how it works. Like, the law is an arm of power. Like, they're like, okay, if you piss us off, we're gonna find a way to sue you. And I think that is kind of how it works. So I suspect that a lot of the people who get actually sued by banks are not the people who did bad. They're the people who pissed off the wrong people. So I get 18 months like wandering around Tokyo, like studying Japanese and like learning to draw. And they make me sit in the corner. So I'm just sitting in the corner of the office, like studying Japanese and drawing pictures of the Beatles and stuff. And in a way, it was nice. It was.
Y así acaba su carrera. Se mudó a Tokio. Pensé que cuando dijo que se mudó a Japón se refería a, figuradamente, dentro de su propio trading floor, allí donde estuviera, en Inglaterra, pero no, se fue hasta allí. Bastante interesante la historia de este chaval. No le gusta al final este mundillo y pues decide dejarlo e intentar mejorarlo. Para eso, por ejemplo, ha hecho este canal de YouTube, seguidle, Gary's Economics, en el que cuenta un poco de todo, sobre todo más macro que otra cosa, no veréis tanto trading. Pero creo que tiene ideas bastante buenas, o al menos que está bien escucharlas, porque seguramente por su perfil sepa defenderlas bastante bien y no será lo que muchos de vosotros podáis tener en la cabeza. Ideología, quizás, si nunca está mal, pues también abrir la mente. Tampoco quiero seguir porque se me hace muy largo. Suscribiros, dadle a me gusta y nos vemos en los próximos vídeos. Un saludo.